Well, as you make your way in and have a seat, as always, I've got more material than we can cover, and the sad news is there's just no way. With one Sunday left, we're going to cover everything in section 4. So we'll do our best. The handout that you have for this morning is just chapter 17, the first chapter. Chapter 18 is a great chapter, especially if you have the book. If you haven't read it yet, read it today because it's about the cross and it's inspiring. This being the day the world celebrates the resurrection of Jesus Christ, or for you King James Version enthusiast, Easter. But I feel compelled. If anybody walks in late, we've got a few more handouts up here. I do feel compelled to go back and finish the last section of our notes from last week. And if you don't have your handout, don't worry. I'm not going to take a lot of time with it. But section 3 was dealing with the question of why do Christians sin? You know how I feel about this material. I'm really gleaning and learning and growing through this study. And I think one of the reasons why is first of all, it's the perspective. The perspective in which we're looking at things is a perspective that, interestingly, is so biblical, which has been one of the huge points that we've made through this study, but it's often not the perspective that we look at or lean into or really spend, honestly, a lot of time looking at. And one of those, why I wanted to go back to chapter 16, it's talking about how Satan uses family to cause us to sin. How Satan can use family to attack us. And I think that's a very interesting perspective. Morning. And so, anyways, I just wanted to go back to that. It caused me to think too about, especially when Kathy and I were closer to newlyweds than we are now, and thinking about Russ and Vicky as they celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary this weekend. Some of the things that they shared and some of the things that are special to me about them is the importance of faith in that relationship. And how often, Kathy and I, when we were newlyweds and growing up and down in Abilene, Texas, far away from our families and that support, it was just interesting how that would kind of ebb and flow. There'd be those times when maybe, let's just stay home. Let's not go to church. And Kathy's like, nah, we know better than that. We need to do that. And sometimes it was Kathy. More often it was Kathy, And I said, no, honey, we got it, And you just did that. When one was maybe tempted, the other one would be the strength. And I just think that's an amazing part of relationships, not just marriage, but really any relationship. When you have helpmates like that support you and beef you up in those moments of maybe when you were not as willing to be as committed as you should be. And then that's why I've always, I know this is uncomfortable for some people, but I really feel firmly about it that, again, I want to say this based on a philosophy that I share with you all the time. The one thing, at least one thing I want you to remember about me when I have left this planet is this advice. Remove opportunities to fail. Okay, so you know what it is. Remove opportunities to fail. I've just found that such a helpful thing in my life. But the opposite of that is, be careful you're not inviting obstacles into your life. And marrying outside your faith will do that. I'm just sorry. No, I'm not sorry. I'm giving you good advice, okay? I'm giving you good advice. And I don't, I've seen a lot of people lose their faith out of that. And what I realized in our study of Joe Beam's book, Seeing the Unseen, Satan will use everything he possibly can to attack us. And so if you as the Bible would say, hitch your wagon, you become unequally yoked with somebody, that you're just inviting an obstacle, a problem into your life that opens the door. Of course, we always justify that, or people justify that by saying what? I'll convert them, right? I'll convert them. Okay, then do that first. Do that first, and then marry them, okay? So, anyways, some of the ways, and if you don't have the last week's handout, that's all right. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. So let me just ask you to get your brain thinking. What are some of the ways that Satan uses families to attack our faith? Okay, bad stuff that happens, yeah. Other thoughts? How do you think God uses family to attack our faith? Pardon?
Somebody gets sick.
Somebody gets sick, yeah. Somebody gets sick and you lose a loved one. How might that challenge you? Cause you to question God? What about kids that experience abuse in their family? How might that sour you? The idea of how can there be a God when these terrible things happen? And these are real and I think relevant questions. And when a person doesn't have as firm a foundation as maybe they could have, those kinds of things will rock a person's faith. When I was a chaplain in a prison in York, as you guys know, you've heard the story hundreds of times, it was a women's prison. And I faced a challenge there in teaching people and sharing the gospel and just doing my work as a chaplain there with these ladies, because quite often they struggled with the idea that God was a father. Why? Their father was a terrible man. Yeah, the father wasn't a good man. The father may have been a reason, again, the example of abuse. Not just their fathers, but sometimes their husbands. It was an interesting little fact, and I don't know how relevant this is from every women's prison, but there at York, the little prison there were several women in that prison for murder. And as I learned their stories, often, and I'm not questioning the justice system or anything with that, so please don't read in between that. But often these women had murdered or severely hurt men that had abused them. And I'll be honest, sometimes when I heard their stories, I'm like, well, I gotta be careful how I say this. I'm like, well, I don't want to justify it, but it's like, you understand. Let me say it that way. You understand how it happened. And that wasn't necessarily saying it was right or wrong. But those were sad things. And so I come along, sharing this message of God the Father that loves you. And they're like, no, I don't want anything to do with that, And again, it just exemplifies, too, the problem of sin in my life is often caused because of the sin in your life. It's really, I think, more rare than we realize that when I get involved in sin, that it's just me, that it hurts. Sometimes I may not be aware of how it affects and hurts others, and that's a sad thing as well. So how does Satan use families, to attack their faith, the sin of abuse, terrible, relationships within that family? The sin of weakness, I kind of alluded to this already. Your spouse says, I don't feel good today, when in reality, they're just fine, okay? Because tomorrow morning, Monday morning, they're going to work. Isn't it amazing how much healing takes place on a Sunday that allows people to go to work on Monday morning, but it kept them from coming to church on Sunday? I tell you what, it's a miraculous God out there working in their lives, isn't it? But, so that happens. So as the spouse, what do you do about that? How do you handle that? And there's just an example of we talked about it before, an example of a potential foothold. Remember we talked about that? You give the devil a foothold, and it doesn't have to be much. And maybe it is just our spouse, not feeling up to it that day. So do you lean into that? You help them through that? Or you just decide, you know what? It won't be a big deal if we both miss church today, kind of thing. And, maybe in and of itself, at that moment, maybe it isn't. But what if it becomes a habit? What if it becomes a regular thing? Now we're talking about a life-changing kind of thing, right? Satan uses family conflict. I'm not proud of this, but you guys know I'm very open about garbage in my life. And I truly believe that my brother, John, who used to attend here a long time ago, isn't here because of family conflict, okay? And I have to own part of that, and trust me, I pray about it daily, or nearly daily. It's something that gnaws at me. But it causes me to think too, am I responsible, and not just my immediate family, but that responsibility that I might have, or the cause that I might be a part of for somebody who's not filling one of these blue chairs this morning? What are we going to do about that? But right or wrong, I think what we need to take away from this is Satan can take any conflict and use it for his purpose, to distract us, okay? To distract us. For me, a big takeaway from chapter 16 is what we're referring to. A big takeaway from this chapter is the importance of family, because it's through family that God meets so many of our needs, and also why we so often think, at least in my heart, and I think in the hearts of many of you, that I think of this congregation as an extension of that family. Sometimes we make a distinction. We have our earthly family and our church family, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. The point that I'm just trying to make is how important these relationships are. And because of that, sometimes it creates, when we get in a tuss, an opportunity again for the devil to have a foothold, and how effective he is when he can just grab a little bit of property in our lives. With that said, I think a significant ministry for any congregation should be about strengthening the family, because the strength of the families is mirrored in the strength of our communities and our culture. Thoughts or comments about how Satan uses families against us? Well, that wraps up section 3 in the book. And jumping into section 4, for those of you who are visiting today, we've been studying Joe Beam's book, Seeing the Unseen. So as I refer to the book, this is the book that I refer to. If you've never read it, or it's been a long time since you read it, read it. Read it, read it, read it. And if you're not familiar with Joe Beam, B-E-A-M, get on YouTube is a good place to go. And look him up. He's got lots on there. Got lots on there that you can see and get introduced to his material. So, section 4, beginning with chapter 17, we're talking about why does God let Satan hurt us? This is a question we've dealt with some. But how are some other ways to rephrase that question? Why does God let Satan hurt us? What are some other ways to ask that same question?
Why does he let unfair things happen to innocent people?
Bingo. Yeah. It's the question of atheists love to throw this at us, or anybody who's struggling with the concept of God, especially the concept of being obedient to God. Well, if there's a God and a God of love, then why is there so much evil, right? Why do good things happen to, bad things happen to good people and those kinds of things? And, that's a significant and an important question. What's been our standard answer to that question? He gives us free will, And honestly, for a lot of us, I don't know if we have any other response to that question. Why is there evil in the world? And I don't mean to downplay that answer, because it's a huge answer to the question. But what I love here in chapter 17 is we have a lot more of answers to that question. And I took a great comfort in that.
Well, Nathan one time made the comment, the reason there's evil in the world is because there's sin in the world. And if you trace it back, all of the evil goes back to something. All of it.
Sure. But if I was that atheist guy and I heard that explanation, it says, well, why does God let that happen then? And again, chapter 17 helps us to understand that idea as well. So let's jump into it. One of the things that stood out to me too, that I think it's important for us to understand as God's children, is the absence of suffering does not define us as Christians. Okay? What has God promised you? What has God promised you?
An abundant spiritual life.
Okay?
What's that? They'll always be there.
They'll always be there for us. Abundant living, abundance in life. What's that? Peace. Okay? Eternal life, right? And hope. In the context of this study, he has promised that we will never be tempted beyond what we can handle. Okay, so in the midst of this battle that we've been talking, this spiritual battle, we have that promise that if we'll lean into God, we will never be in a position that we can't overcome. Okay? Tanya Tucker. I think it was Tanya Tucker. You classic Western country music fans, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, was it not Tanya Tucker? And now that I say that, I could be wrong on that. I never promised you a rose garden. Wasn't that Tanya Tucker? Who? Lynn Anderson. Okay, thank you. Lynn Anderson. Long white hair, Lynn Anderson. Yeah. I never promised you a rose garden. Did God promise you a rose garden? No. He did not. Now, if you want to refer to heaven as a rose garden, okay, I'll go with that. But really, my point is, God had never promised us that we wouldn't suffer. Book, chapter, and verse if I'm wrong. Book, chapter, and verse if I'm wrong. Surprise me. I'm not surprised that I'm wrong once in a while. I'm just, what did I miss? If I miss something, speak up. But I find no place in the Bible where God says there won't be suffering. But the opposite of that is true. The opposite of that is true. God did say, you will suffer, didn't he? Jesus said, if you look, act, smell, sound like me, You will be what? Persecuted. Not just suffering, but persecuted. Persecuted means what? I mean, think about what that word means. If you're being persecuted, you're being what? Bullied, harassed, attacked. Attacked. Okay? You don't just walk into it. It comes after you. Okay? And that's what we've been promised. Why would God promise us something like that? I tell you what, if I'm an atheist and you're trying to convince me to be a child of God, you're trying to convince me to believe in God, and all of a sudden you share this promise of persecution, I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm not interested anymore.
Because he knows the battle we're in, and he knows Satan, and if you're going to be his child, take the command.
So he's just being honest is part of that, right? He's just being honest, okay? He's not pulling any punches. He said, if this is the life you choose. Remember, we started this with why we have free will, we have a choice. And so if this is what you choose, I just want you to understand what you're signing up for. So we can appreciate that, right? Right? Well, chapter 17 gives us some more details about this. So let's get into it. But let me back up a moment, though, and say this. I wrote down the question here. What do you want to be when you grow up? Who do we say that to? Immature preachers, right? Kids, right? I mean, as an elementary school principal, I'm having those conversations all the time with kids. Why is that such an important question? Sure. Let me boil it down a little bit. Why is choice so important? Why is choice so important? Pardon?
Determines where we end up.
I like that. It sets a direction, doesn't it? It sets a direction. Yes, I like that. But it also says you have a responsibility to make a choice. Yeah. It sets direction. It's a responsibility that we have. Would we say it's a privilege? Don't you think? Absolutely. Right. But when it comes to God, we certainly does. So we have this choice whether we want to deal with this suffering, this persecution that we've been promised. And so maybe to help me understand, why would I want to make that choice? Why would I want to go in that direction? We get a hint that there's purpose behind suffering. Suffering is a process that God uses to make us stronger. Let's open up our Bibles to Romans chapter 8. And this is a passage we've looked at more than once as well in this study. So let's go back there again. Romans chapter 8. And let's pick it up at verse 28. Read along with me as I read this, or just listen attentively. Beginning at verse 28, I'm in Romans 8. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Now let's make sure we understand what that just said. Does that say that everything you experience as a child of God will be good? Is that what it says? No. Sometimes that's how we read it when we casually or quickly read through it. But I think it's really important for us to understand that he's talking about all things, which include bad things. All things here includes bad things. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called, and those whom he also justified, all those whom he called, he also justified, and those whom he justified, he also glorified. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? In other words, what I want us to glean from that statement right there, if God is for us, who can be against us? It's that idea that God indeed has the power to take terrible things in our life and bring good out of it. So again, it's not the promise you won't experience terrible things, but it is the promise that terrible things can lead and will, when we are connected through God by his will, or sharing common his will, that those bad things will indeed produce something good in our lives. If God is for us, who can be against us? He did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all. How will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is it to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. More than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress, persecution, famine, or nakedness, or danger, or sword? Okay, there's a promise nobody mentioned this morning. What did he just promise there?
Nothing can separate us from Christ.
And I think there's two things. That's number one on there. Nothing's going to separate us. Not even death. But again, it's that reiterating that promise that through suffering, good can come. That no matter what you experience, it's not going to change, or it's not going to take God from you. I'm not sure if that's the best way to say that. Who, verse 35, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. We are more than overcomers. We are more than blessed, because even out of tragedy, good can come. God promised that. God promised that. No, in all things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. Again, Did you hear the spiritual side of that? Did you hear the spiritual side of that? The heavenly realm stuff, the unseen stuff? This promise, this protection extends to that as well. Okay? Good news. So, what does this text tell us about suffering? Again, in all things God works for good. He didn't spare his own Son from it. So I'm not sure why we should expect for us to be spared, is the point. Suffering is not evidence that God isn't present. For the world, it has been. But in reality, the truth is, the presence of evil is not evidence that God isn't present. In fact, I think one of the takeaways from this text, from chapter 17, is that suffering may in fact be evidence that God is present. That's kind of a different twist, isn't it? That's kind of a different twist. Suffering can be in fact evidence that God is present. So let's look at some examples of God allowing suffering. 2 Corinthians 12:7. To keep me, Paul, to keep me, Paul, from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of who? Right there on the worksheet. A messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. We hear sermons all the time about Paul's thorn in the flesh, don't we? And from the book of Galatians, we get a hint that maybe it was a vision problem, okay? Remember Saul's conversion? What did God do to him? Made him suffer. But you're right, he blinded him. And through that, he suffered. He suffered. What happened in that suffering from his blindness? What was the good that came out of it? He was transformed. He was saved.
No, not in the suffering.
Well, it led to his.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, he everything was taken from him in that suffering. Okay? Got his attention. And with his attention, he finally heard the truth. And he was able to respond to that. And so as the story goes on, his sight is restored and he's baptized. I mean, what a powerful example of God causing that suffering. Not just allowing it to happen, but in fact causing it to happen. Apparently, Paul was a proud man. And I mean, he admits that here in the text, that he's a proud man. And I think that was, I think Paul took great satisfaction in the work that he was doing in persecuting those of the way, as it was referred to then. And God had to take that pride away from him, had to humble him to get him to hear. But he also needed to remind him the rest of his life not to what? To be proud. And literally for Paul, that meant to be leaning into his accomplishments as a person. He was a well-studied, well-accomplished man by earthly standards. And God needed to make sure that he never leaned into his own accomplishments again, but leaned into that gospel. A thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me. All right? Brothers and sisters, this just wasn't him being nearsighted or farsighted or with glaucoma or whatever it was. But no, this was suffering. This was suffering. How many times did Paul ask for this to be taken away? At least 3 that we know of. And every time the answer is no. No. Paul, you need this suffering to keep you humble and focused. So, example of suffering leading to good. All right. How many of you was Paul involved in your conversion? I mean, think about that. How many of you was Paul involved in your conversion? Every hand should be up. I mean, if you studied the New Testament, think about that. All right, how about Genesis 45, the story of Joseph? The story of Joseph. Okay? Again, terrible suffering. We're not going to turn there. We don't have time for that. So just listen. What did Joseph's suffering start with?
Blindness.
Huh?
Blind. He fell off the horse and was blinded by the scales of his eyes.
No, you're Joseph in Genesis 45. Coat of many colors. His brothers did what to him? Talk about family conflict. family conflict. That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Terrible thing. Terrible thing. That those brothers were so jealous, so envious that we're just going to get rid of him. You know, they weren't so terrible. They didn't want to kill him. Just get rid of him. You know, so there was a little kindness in their meanness, right? Right? That's sarcasm, by the way. Okay. What else then happened to Joseph? What were some other bad things that happened to Joseph?
Potiphar's wife lied about him, got him thrown in jail.
What's that?
Potiphar's wife lied about him.
Oh, Potiphar's wife. Yeah. Here the guy is doing exactly what he should have done. You know, like, hey, King David, check out this example, right? Yeah. There's a lie. He gets thrown in prison. It's really interesting to read this in the book, but we just don't have time. But how God used each one of these terrible events in his life for amazingly good things. I want you to understand, too, you and I have been blessed because of Joseph. I mean, this is where the line of Israel begins, okay? And it's through that God worked and brought us Jesus, and blessed are we today because of that. I mean, it's kind of an interesting connection here. I want you to hear the words of Joseph himself. In Genesis 45, verse 5 said, now this is Joseph talking. God sent me before you. Remember, in the end, Joseph he's over everything. There's terrible famine in the land. And because of what he's been able to learn, because of his management skills, bottom line, because of being blessed by God, things that he learned through his suffering, he was able to save the world, God's people at that time, because of all of that. And so you know the story. It's an amazing story. The brothers come to buy grain and everything, and Joseph recognizes them as his brothers, and they recognize him, and they're what? Terrified. Terrified, because now they realize who their brother is, who also is in a position that he could have done what to them? He could have done anything he wanted. But the fear was that he would have them killed. But Joseph says, he calms them down. He says, no, you don't understand. God sent me ahead of you. You know, did he say, oh, you guys are lucky, you sold me into slavery and it worked out just fine? Is that what he said? No. He looked at it as a blessing. God sent me here, not you. Guys, I'm reading this right out of the text here. Genesis 45 and verse 5. Listen to what verse 7 says. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth. That's where I'm connecting us to it, okay? That remnant he saved leads us to today as the world celebrates the resurrection. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant of earth and to keep you alive for many survivors. So if that's a true statement, and it is, it's what Joseph obviously believed. It's a perfect example of God allowing suffering to lead to blessing. It's a perfect example of that. Both Paul's story, Joseph's story, verse 8, Genesis 45. So it was not you who sent me here. It was God. Which implies that God worked through the terrible thing they did. Now, you might be uncomfortable with that wording, and I might be too. That God worked or that God used. And I think there's a difference there. So go with whatever's comfortable with you. Thoughts or comments about that? Examples of God, at a minimum, allowing suffering. And we're seeing the promise of Romans 8 come through here. All terrible things work out for good. Boy, we have some powerful examples of that in Scripture. Another one, this is chapter 18, so we'll be talking about this next week, but Jesus on the cross. Jesus on the cross. Okay? God allowed that. In fact, more than that, God created the plan that needed a Savior to hang on a cross or to be sacrificed. Okay? God created that plan, knowing the suffering that he himself would experience. Not just his son. Not just his son. So the question, working towards the bottom of the page there, is how has God allowed and used suffering in your life? Anybody want to share a response to that? How has God used suffering in your life to bless you?
Well, everything I have wrong my life, I think that God has used that for me to be an empathetic hearer. Didn't happen everything, but it was empathetic. I think
You're a tough egg to crack, Carlene.
but I think that has served a purpose in my life. Because I tend to be a little strong-handed, and hold on to ways of life, and I'll fix it, and I'll let you know when I need your help. I'm kind of like Paul, God has used that to temper me and help me with dealing with others, kinder to others.
Let's look at this big picture. Has suffering ever in your life drawn you closer to God? Okay, there's an example. Okay, there's an example of suffering working for good. Because suffering can so often cause us to realize that all I've accomplished or have accessible to me means nothing. Means nothing. And when you realize all this stuff means nothing, the only thing you have left is your faith, right? In God. Now, Satan's betting that you'll give that up too. And unfortunately, more people lose their faith over those things than gain it. Other ideas, thoughts about how suffering has led to blessing in your life? Think about that. Think about it. Because I think you'll probably realize there's some things that maybe you haven't thanked God for that maybe we should. Ah. Sure. Sure. Suffering. Now, I got a couple examples here, so bear with me if they don't make sense to you if you're reading ahead. Why do I so often fail with my diets? And right along with that, why am I struggling to get better at playing the guitar? And I answered the question there with the third bullet. Because I spend a lot of time avoiding suffering. Now, I want you to understand something. Define for me suffering. Define suffering.
Anything you don't want to do.
Okay? If there's something I don't want to do, okay, I like that. I think lots of times when we think of suffering that we go to that extreme, the pain, the big hurts, the tragedies, the loss of a loved one in a car accident or to cancer, and those are real things, and I don't mean to diminish them, but I think we need to understand too that suffering comes in little packages. Sometimes the suffering is saying no to temptation. Oh, I really want to do that. That'd be a lot of fun. I'm home alone, and I start justifying all these reasons why I can do it. Suffering is saying no. okay? It's not a big tragic event, or is it? Because if I give in to that and avoid that suffering by giving in to the temptation, think about where that can lead. James says it leads to where? Death, right? So maybe my wording here isn't very good, even what appears to be little is still big. Okay? Say that again. I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yes. I mean, how many times, here's a good example. Have you ever come to church when you didn't want to? Okay, that's obedience, right? You didn't want to. In fact, you had a pretty good excuse, I mean, potential bubonic plague, come on, this is big stuff here. I'm just protecting the rest of the congregation by not being there and exposing them to these terrible bacteria fighting in my body. Oh, I'm such a compassionate person. Sarcasm, okay. No, please. Stop me. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's no small thing, is it? Yeah. But again, getting back to my diet thing, the other night, Kathy, very lovingly, she throws some Almond Joys down by next to my chair. And I love them. Yeah, they're little ones, but there were 3, And for me, part of that strategy in my life, remove opportunities to fail, means don't put Almond Joys next to my TV chair.
But I was sacrificing.
Yeah, she was sacrificing me. And you know what? They lasted about a day. For a day I suffered. No Almond Joy. And then all of a sudden one night, 1 tasted pretty good. 2 tasted better. 3 was a delight. Ate all 3 of them right there, But it's a simple, funny little thing, but to say no is that suffering. And that's why diets fail, because I'm not willing to suffer that I might experience the good that will come of it. Same with my guitar. You guys know I'm trying to learn to play guitar. I've been working on it since COVID. Would you keep her under control? Catherine, would you? You're the adult there in that row. You take care of that. But again, if I'm going to get better at guitar, I have to practice. I got to learn to read my music, and you know what? It's just easier.
But making you feel that that's suffering. It's a state of mind. It's a way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But I have to give up the time to do that as opposed to something else I want to do.
Or even a candy bar. Because then if you have high cholesterol, for instance.
And I do.
You shouldn't be eating those, because that's just gonna, if you cherish your body, and now I'm talking to the choir here, then we would have it in our mind then, a mindset that I don't need that because I want to take care of.
Now, that's a point where we get to when we get successful with dealing and fighting temptation. Because honestly, the things that tempted me a lot back here that I've become victorious of, they're not temptations anymore. I used to smoke 3 packs a day. 3 packs a day. Back when I was in the military, a young man, and I tell you what, That was a hard thing to give up, if you've ever dealt with that. But for the longest time after that, I might not have smoked for 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months, but I'd smell it. Like, oh, you just would salivate, that you're being tempted. But now, if one of you were to light up a cigarette right now, of course we'd be in shock, but just bear with me. If you were to light up and I'd smell that, it's disgusting to me now. It's dirty, okay? And so that's the transition. I'm not there yet with my diet and guitar, okay? But maybe one day. All right. 1 Peter 1:3. Oh, we've ran out of time again, but I want to let's read this passage. 1 Peter 1. 1 Peter 1, chapter 1, starting at verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his grace mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's powers are being guarded through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in that last time. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise, glory, and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Verse 8, though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Going back to verse 7, so that the tested genuineness of your faith. And we're going to pick this up next week using this illustration from this text about how gold is refined. And we'll see how suffering does exactly the same thing for our faith. Thank you for letting me go long. Let's get ready to worship.
How did you learn to play golf?
Watched other people and then just started doing it.